Hi there, I am Woochia and I'm back for another gear review. Today we're going to take a look at the ELZ1 by Sonicware. It's a digital synth that can generate sounds in a lot of ways thanks to its 11 different algorithms and 20 effects. You can go up to 3 envelopes or 1 envelope and 2 LFOs, or you can then play it with the keyboard here or with the Arpeggiator, a step sequencer, or by controlling it by an external device. We'll see all that in details in this video. There is a lot to say, so you can find all the timings for all the parts of this review/tutorial down below in the description. This is not a sponsored video, but Sonicware did accept to send me these things all the way from Japan so I could make my review, so I'd like to thank them very much. When I first heard about the ELZ1, I thought that was a pretty exciting piece of hardware, so I'm very happy to get my hands on it. So let's begin with an overview of the machine. The machine itself is 5 cm thick and 40 cm long, which fits in a backpack, barely, but it fits, which is nice. When you receive it, it comes with a pouch like this one to transport it. It feels like it's made of some kind of foam and it seems to protect it quite well. And you also get a USB power cord, so you can power it with a phone charger or this kind of little power tank, which is super handy for someone like me who doesn't like to rely on AA batteries. But you can still power it with AA batteries if you want to do so, and it will take 4 of them. It also have a little built-in speaker, so it's very transportable. On the back you have the button to turn it on here, next to the hole to plug the power cable. And next to that you have the USB plug to connect it to a computer, so you can manage the files that are in it, or you can use it as a MIDI input to control it with a computer or another machine. Then you have the aux input that you can use to plug a microphone or an audio player to record some sound, or you can use it as a sync in or sync out to synchronize it with other machines like pocket operators or Volcas. Then you have 2-line output, left and right in jack format with its dedicated volume knob. And you have a mini jack stereo output for the headphones, and this knob controls the volume of the headphones, or it will control the volume of the built-in speaker if you don't use one. On the front panel you have these 5 knobs to access the different parts of the synth. That's what you'll use all the time with the knobs below here. This one is for the sound source, the oscillator of the synth. This one is for the envelope that will control the amplitude of the signal. You can add other envelopes to control other things, but we'll see that in a minute. This one is for the filters, this one is for the effects and other parameters, and this one is for the arpeggiator and the step sequencer. Then to control the parameters in each of these sections, you have these 5 knobs here. The type knob here changes the type of whatever you have selected, the type of oscillator, the type of envelope, the type of filter, etc. And the knobs 1 to 4 change the parameters that are displayed at the bottom of the screen here, 1 to 4. If you are in a section that have more than 4 parameters, you can cycle through different pages by pressing the sections button again. You will see an indicator for these pages on the right side of the screen next to the parameters. On the right side of the screen you have the minus and plus button to cycle through the presets and saved patches. I just discovered reading through the preset list that some of them have been made by Cuckoo. I had no idea he worked with the ELZ1, and I find it pretty cool because I really like what he does. And this button with an arrow and a square is the save button to save the patch you're working on. If you load a preset and change a parameter, you'll notice a bubble appears on the screen that says edited. That indicates that there are some unsaved changes that you could lose if you don't save the preset. So that's a handy indicator to have. And the last button on this row is the tap button, where you can tap a new tempo for the arpeggiator or the step sequencer. When you press the tap button, you also have the BPM displayed on the screen, so you can change it by turning any of these knobs. On the row below you can access the menu with the menu button, then you can scroll in there with the down and up arrow and use the OK button to select whatever you want to select, and you can go back by pressing the menu button again. And when you're not in a menu, you can use this down and up arrow to shift the keyboard an octave down or an octave up. The keyboard in itself gives access to 3 octaves, which is pretty comfortable already, but it is not velocity sensitive. You can still play notes with different velocities, but to do that you will need to control the ELZ1 with another machine by USB. So how does this all work? How do we actually use it? I will explain each section one by one to show you how they work together. The first section is the oscillator. That is the sound source that will then be processed by the rest of the synth. And you can select the type of oscillator you want with this type knob. There are 11 to choose from that we're going to see one by one. There is the low bit oscillator, the standard oscillator, the custom oscillator. There are 3 8-bit wavemem synth, one normal mode, a morph mode and an FM mode. Then the DNA Explorer and the SiGrinder, which both use audio files to generate waveforms, an FM synth with 4 operators, masked noise and sand flute. For each of these oscillator types you can change the parameters with the knobs 1 to 4. It will control parameters shown at the bottom of the screen here, so the parameters can change depending on the oscillator you have selected. So the first type of oscillator is the low bit oscillator, which can be of different waveforms. You can change the waveform with the knob too. It can be a sine wave, a square wave, a triangle, a ramp up or a sawtooth wave. Then on the third knob you have a parameter called duty. It is like a pulse width parameter which will squeeze the first half of the waveform, and it works with any waveform. All these waveforms have a maximum definition of 8 bits, but you can downgrade them to 4 bits or 2 bits with the knob 1. That will give it a harsher lo-fi sound. You can see on the bottom right of the screen there are 2 pages, and you can cycle through these pages by pressing the oscillator button again. There you have a mod type parameter. This is to add an envelope generator or an LFO to modulate a part of the oscillator, but we'll see that more in detail a bit later in this video. The second oscillator type is the standard oscillator. There you can change the type of waveform with the knob 1, which are the same than for the low bit oscillator: sine, square, triangle, ramp up and sawtooth. And you also have a duty parameter, which is again some kind of pulse width. And on the second page you also have the mode type, the same that we had before. The next oscillator type is the custom oscillator, in which you can mix 2 different waveforms. So with the knobs 1 and 2 you can change the waveform 1 and the waveform 2, and then the oscillator will switch from one to the other cyclically. Then you can offset the time when it switches from one waveform to the other with the period parameter on knob 3. And you also have the duty parameter on knob 4, which is still kind of a pulse width parameter. The next 3 oscillator types are different variations of the same 8-bit engine. It's called the 8-bit wavemem synth, and it allows you to create custom waveforms. There is the normal version, the morph version and the FM mode. In the ELZ1 you also have 3 types of memory banks to save your custom waveforms. You have one called memory, which is one temporary slot specific to each oscillator. That is where you can edit your custom waveforms. Then to save these waveforms you have a bank of 50 slots that can be used by the normal mode and the morph mode. Then you have a FM bank of 20 slots to save custom waveforms made with FM synthesis, and that is usable by the morph and the FM mode. Alright, so let's see the normal mode of the 8-bit wavemem synth. With the knob 1 you can select the memory slot you want to work with. You can either select a waveform saved in one of the banks, or you can select memory if you want to edit the wave shape. To load a waveform from the bank to edit it, you need to press OK, then banks to memory, and then select the bank you want to load in with any of these knobs. Then press OK to load it. When you work with the memory, you can go from left to right with the knob 3, and then with the knob 4 you can change the value of the position you have selected. This way you can edit your own waveform. And then on the knob 2 you have a detune function, which will kind of duplicate your oscillator and detune them one from the other. And when you are done, you can save your waveform to one of the banks by pressing OK, then memory to bank, and then select the bank on which you want to save your waveform. Then press OK to select or menu to cancel. With the morph version of the 8-bit wavemem synth, you can load 3 different waveforms from either the normal bank or the FM bank. You can use the knobs 1, 2 and 3 to change the 3 waveforms, and the third one is actually optional. If you turn it all the way to the left, it will deactivate the third waveform. The shape of the oscillator will then start with the waveform 1, morph into waveform 2, then into waveform 3, and then back to 1, cyclically. And with the knob 4 you can change the speed with which this morphing occurs. With the FM version of the 8-bit wavemem synth, you can load a waveform from the FM bank or use the memory to edit the waveform. You can load the FM bank to the memory just like we did with the normal mode with the OK button. When you're working with the memory, you can adjust the FM ratio with the knob 3. That will change the pitch of the modulating signal, which I assume to be a sine wave. And with the knob 4 you can change its level. You can follow on the screen what it does to the waveform. Then when you're done, you can save your new waveform to an FM bank slot with the OK button. Just select Memory to Bank and select the bank on which you want to save it. The next oscillator type is the DNA Explorer, and it will extract waveforms from audio files. You can either import a file from the internal memory, or you can record a new one with a microphone plugged in the aux input. To save and import these audio files you have 3 slots, which means you can only save 3 audio files of a few seconds each, and I think that's really not a lot. I mean, it's like a sampler, but that can hold only 3 samples, so yeah, that's really not a lot. Anyway, so you can choose the audio file you want to work with on the second page with the knob 1, wave data 1, wave data 2, or wave data 3. To record your own sound, you need to connect an audio source to the mini jack aux input that is at the back. I don't have a microphone that works with it, but I can demonstrate with a pocket operator. You just have to press OK to open the dialog box, then OK again to record. Then you can press menu to cancel or OK to save what you have recorded. Now what we have recorded is inside the DNA Explorer. Then on the first page of parameter you have the Explore on the knob 1, which is the starting point of the sample. And the dig parameter on knob 2 sets how much of the sample you want to extract. So that part of the sample will then be played in loop and become your oscillator. And you can also double it an octave above with the harmony knob that is on knob 3. The next oscillator type is the SiGrinder, which is very similar to the DNA Explorer. On the second page of parameters, you can set the starting point and the end point with the knobs 1 and 2, and with the knob 3 you can set the grain size of the generated waveform, so it creates some kind of rhythmic patterns. Then on the first page of the oscillator you can set the resolution with the knob 1, which I assume to be some kind of sample rate for the waveform, so the higher you turn the knob, the faster the repeating pattern will play. To be honest with you, it's kind of a mystery of how exactly this engine works under the hood, but it can generate really crazy sounds and it's super cool. So on top of that you still have the dig parameter and the harmony parameter on the knobs 2 and 3, and you also have a bit crusher which can have 4 settings: off, normal, heavy and destruction. The next oscillator type is the FM synth, and it's also pretty deep. It's made of 4 oscillators, which are all sine waves, so you can change the pitch of each oscillator with the ratio knob, so a ratio of 1 will be the note you play on the keyboard, and the ratio of 2 would be 1 octave higher. Here, as a little side note, I find the values for the ratio a bit weird. You can only move it by 1/10 of an octave, which I think would have more sense if we would be able to move it by 1/12 of an octave. This way, each incrementation will be a note on the keyboard because there are 12 notes in an octave. Then you can change the volume and the feedback of each oscillator with the knob 2 and 3, or you can detune them by plus or minus 64 cents with the knob 4. So you'll have the same parameters on the pages 1 to 4 for the 4 oscillators. On the 5th page you can change the algorithm with the knob 1. It will change how the oscillators are connected, so it will change which oscillator will modulate which one. And on the knob 4 you have a parameter that is called gacha, which will randomize a lot of the parameters of the FM synth. It will randomize the algorithm used, the feedback of all the oscillators, and the ratio of the oscillators 2 to 4. And that's pretty cool because there are so many parameters with this one that it's very handy to have quick random starting points like that. The next oscillator type is the masked noise. It will essentially combine either a white noise or a pink noise with a basic waveform. You can choose the type of noise with the knob 1, the type of waveform with the knob 2, and the knob 3 will set the balance between the two. So as is, it sounds really harsh, but having noise as a source can actually allow you to make pretty cool stuff. Then the last type of oscillator is the synth flute. It also takes noise as a source and then puts a series of 5 filters behind it. The cutoff frequencies of these filters will follow the harmonic series of the notes you play. That means the first filter would be at the frequency of the note you play, the second filter would be at twice this frequency, the third filter will be at 3 times this frequency, etc. So you can first select the type of noise you want to use with the knob 1 between white noise and pink noise, then select the type of filter you want with the knob 2. You can turn this off if you want only white noise or pink noise. Or you can select a bandpass filter, a point EQ if you want to only boost frequencies, or a notch filter to cut them. And then you can change the bandwidth of the filters with the knob 3 to make them wider or narrower. And finally you can set the level of each band. The band 1 is on the knob 4 on the first page, and the bands 2 to 5 are on the second page on the knobs 1 to 4. Okay, now that we have seen all the oscillator types, just before we go to the next section, I will jump a bit ahead and show you how you can turn this synth into a polyphonic synth or a monophonic synth, because I think it's more related to the oscillator section. So to do that, you need to go to the effects section, and if you press the effect button several times, you will eventually arrive to this page where you can change the voice mode. You can change the type of voice mode with the type knob. So you have poly, which is 6 voice polyphonic, or you can select mono, which will make it a monophonic synth where each note is triggered by the main envelope. And you have a glide parameter on the knob 2, which will set the speed of the pitch glide between two notes. Or you can select legato, which is also a monophonic mode, but here the envelope won't be triggered if you play a note while another note is already playing, and you also have this glide parameter there. If you are now wondering what is this main envelope I was talking about, this is what we'll see now, as the second section is for the envelopes. These will be the amplitude envelopes. They will control the volume of the oscillator, and there are several types of envelope to choose from with this type knob. So the first one is the classic ADSR. The knobs 1 to 4 will allow you to control the attack, the time it takes to the note to reach its full volume when you press a key. The decay, the time it takes after the attack to go from the full volume to the sustain level. The sustain, which is the volume of a note when you hold a key down. And the release time, the time it takes to the note to die after you release a key. The second type of envelope is very similar, except it allows you to add curves to the attack, the decay, and the release. So in these phases, the volume can evolve in a non-linear fashion. So with the knob 1 you control the attack time, and with the knob 2 you control the curve of the attack. Then with the knob 3 you control the decay time, and with the knob 4 the curve of the decay. Then on the next page you have the sustain level, then the release time with the knob 2 and the curve of the release. The third type of envelope is interesting. It is an ADS-AR envelope. So when you press a key on the keyboard, the envelope will go through the attack, decay and sustain phases as normal, but when you release the key, it will trigger another attack. So a note will be played when you press a note and when you release it. The controls are the attack time, the decay time and the sustain level, and then the attack time for when you release the key, then on the next page the level of that second attack, and then the release time. And the fourth and last envelope type is also an ADS-AR envelope, but with extra controls to add curves to the attack, decay and release times. The next button here is for the filters, and as always you can change the type of filter you want to use with the type knob. They all come with these little eyes, so they are so cute, but if you want to see the grid of frequencies instead, you can press the OK button. So the first type of filter is the smooth -6 dB low pass filter, without much control because you can only control the cutoff frequency and the pre-gain. But next you have a minus 12 dB low pass filter on which you can control the cutoff, the resonance and also the pre-gain. Next you have the same things with the high pass filter. First a minus 6 dB high pass filter where you can't control the resonance, and then a minus 12 dB high pass filter where you can control the resonance. Then you have a bandpass filter where the resonance has been removed and replaced by a bandwidth. Then you have a 1-point EQ where you can control the frequency, the bandwidth, and also how much you want to boost or cut the point you have selected. And then you still have the pre-gain knob. Then you have a low shelf and a high shelf where the Q controls the slope between the part that is boosted or lowered and the part that is not. And finally you have a notch filter to completely cut a frequency. You can control the bandwidth with the knob too as well. All these filters have a second page where you can set a mod type. Just like the oscillators, it allows you to add either a LFO or an envelope to control one of the parameters. So now is a good time to see how it works. It works in the same way for the filters than for the oscillators. When you are on a page with a mod type parameter, you can either set it on off, LFO or envelope. And when you select an LFO or an envelope, you will have access to extra parameters. The first one will be the assign, where you can select which parameter you want to control. The available parameters to control will change depending on the oscillator type or the filter you're working on. Here, for example, for the low pass filter, I only have access to the frequency and the resonance. So for example, let's set a minus 12 dB low pass filter and add an LFO to control the cutoff frequency. When you add an LFO, you can change the waveform of the LFO with the knob 3. It can be a sine wave, a square, a triangle, a sawtooth waveform, which is ramp up actually, or reverse sawtooth, which is what I consider to be the regular sawtooth, or random. Then you can change the rate of the LFO with the knob 4. Or on the next page you have the depth to see how much the LFO is affecting the frequency. My only regret here is that you can't sync the LFO rate to the BPM, so you have to do that manually by ear. And if in the mod type you select an envelope instead, you will have access to other controls. You can introduce a delay time with the knob 3, so the envelope will wait a certain amount of time before beginning its cycle. And you can invert the effect of the envelope with the knob 4, so here the cutoff of the filter will be moved either upward or downward by the envelope. On the next page you will have access to the depth to set how much the envelope will affect the cutoff frequency here, and the rest of the knobs will be to control the envelope itself with the attack, decay, sustain and the release on the next page. So the envelope you add in this way will be a different envelope than the one you can access with the envelope button. So in total you can have one envelope for the amplitude, that's the main one, plus one modulator, LFO or envelope to control one parameter on the oscillator, plus one other modulator, LFO or envelope to control a parameter on the filter. So that's a lot of cool things you can do to add motion to your sound. Okay, the next section here is for the effect, and when you press the effect button you will see the 4 boxes here on the screen, and you can load one effect in each of them, so you can have up to 4 effects simultaneously. You can change the effect in each slot with the type knob and move to the next effects by pressing the effect button again. In the first slot you can put distortion effects or some modulation effects. You have first an overdrive, a distortion and a fuzz, the first one being the smoothest and the latter being the most aggressive. They all have a gain knob and a tone, which is kind of a low pass filter if you want to remove some of the higher harmonics. Or you can select a chorus, a vibrato, a phaser, a tremolo, a flanger, a ring modulator or an auto-wah effect. What's interesting with the tremolo effect is that you can change its waveform, and as it modulates the volume of the synth, you can use it as a slicer effect by selecting a square or a sawtooth waveform. Then in the second slot you'll find kind of the same effects that in the first one, in case you want to combine 2 of these effects: stereo, chorus, vibrato, phaser, tremolo, flanger, autopan, ring modulator and auto-wah. In the third slot, you have the delay effect. So you have a delay, a tape echo, and a reverse delay. They all have the same controls. A time on the first knob if you don't want it to be synced to the tempo, a synced time on the second knob if you want it synced to the tempo, then a feedback on the third one, and a mix on the fourth one to mix between the dry signal and the wet one. And in the fourth slot, you have the reverb effect. You have a room reverb, a hall, a plate, and a custom reverb. The first three are like presets that you can't really change. You only have access to the mix between the dry and the wet signal. And then the custom reverb gives you the control to create your own. With a pre-delay, you have the decay time, a high damp in case you want to lower the high frequencies, and the mix knob. Then, if you keep pressing the effect button, you'll have another page, which is where you can set if the synth is polyphonic or monophonic, and you can also change the level and the tuning of the oscillators independently to the global settings. Now that we have seen everything to make our sounds with the ELZ1, let's see how to play with it. The next section is the Arpeggiator. By default, the Arpeggiator should be off, and you can activate it by turning the type knob to select the type of Arpeggiator you want. When it is on, you can hold several keys on the keyboard and it will play it for you in a sequence. And the order of the notes will depend on the Arpeggiator mode you have selected. So upward will play the note from the lowest to the highest. Downward will play from the highest to the lowest. Then up down. Down up, which is the reverse. Up and down is very similar to up down, except it will repeat the first and the last note of the sequence. Then down and up, random, and play order, which is really cool, especially with the hold function. With any of the Arpeggiator type, you can tap the OK button to activate or deactivate the hold function. When it is on, you don't have to keep the note pressed down, you just have to press them once, and then the Arpeggiator will hold them for you. There's a little indicator at the top of the screen here when the hold function is on. So with the play order mode, the Arpeggiator will play the notes in the order you play them. And with the hold function, it allows you to trigger several times the same note, so you can use it essentially like a sequencer. And when you want to get rid of the sequence, you can press the OK button to deactivate the hold function. Then, when your arpeggio is playing, you can set its speed with the knob 1 if it's not locked to the tempo, or you can lock it to the tempo with the knob 3. You can change the BPM of the arpeggio with the knob 4, and with the knob 2 you can change the gate length, which will make the notes longer or shorter. So we saw here all the base functions for the 5 sections of the synth, but since the version 2 of the firmware, they also added a sequencer. I have to say they really hit the nail on the head with this one. To access it, you need to hold the Arpeggiator button for a second, and it will swap the Arpeggiator for the sequencer. This is a 6-voice polyphonic sequencer, and you can make sequences up to 64 steps long. And you can even chain sequences together if 64 steps is not long enough for your taste. And then you can save up to 128 different patterns. So to begin, you can select the pattern you want to work with the type knob. And here the play stop button is on the OK button, and the record is on the save button. And you can notice the controls change whenever the sequence is playing or not. Okay, so let's make a sequence. You can either do it step by step, or you can record it live while the sequence is playing. Let's see the step by step first. When the sequence is stopped, you can navigate your position in the sequence with the knob 1, and when record is active, you can play any note to add them in the sequence. When you hold the key down and move the position, you can make longer notes, and you can add several notes at once to create chords. If you write over a note that is already there, it will erase it. If you press the menu button while the recording is active, it will undo everything that have been done since you started recording. Then when the knob 2 you have the gate to make notes longer or shorter, just like with the Arpeggiator. On the knob 3 you have the speed with which the notes will be played, and on the knob 4 you have the pattern length. So you can make a pattern with a length anywhere between 1 step and 64 step. When you press play, these controls change. You still have the gate on knob 2, but the 3 becomes the volume of the metronome, which is handy to record something on the fly. And on knob 4 you have the tempo of the sequence. And the knob 1 will change the writing mode for when you press a key on the keyboard. The first note is add, so it will add the notes you play to the sequence, and the last mode is erase, which will erase the notes you play from the sequence. That are the two modes I use the most, but in between you have overwrite, which will erase everything when you press a key to replace that section with what you're playing. And then you have the add 1 and overwrite 1, which work just like the add and the overwrite mode, except they don't allow long notes, they will only add notes of 1 step. The cool thing is that when the sequence is playing, if you turn the type knob, it will wait until the end of the sequence before switching to the one you're selecting. And if the sequence is playing and the recording is active, turning the type knob will allow you to select a slot to copy that pattern to. Also, when the sequence is playing and the record is active, you can erase the whole sequence by pressing the sequence button and the effect button. So now we've seen pretty much everything for the synth part, but before we wrap it up, I'd like to add a few things about the menus and how to access the internal memories and how to synchronize the ELZ1 with other machines. So with the menu button, you can access a lot of things. It is rather well made. Everything related to the presets is in the memory menu, everything related to the sequencer is in the sequencer menu, wave data is for the waveform banks, and in the sequencer menu you can access the patterns. All of which you can import from the internal memory, export, or you can rename your presets and patterns. To access the internal memory from a computer, you'll need to connect it with a USB cable. Then you need to go in the menu, storage, USB mass storage mode. It will connect to your computer just like a USB key. In there you will find everything you have exported from the ELZ1. You have only 8 MB of space, which is really not a lot, but it's enough I guess. And finally, you can use the ELZ1 with other machines, either by MIDI or with audio sync. The MIDI uses the same USB plug and the audio sync uses the mini jack aux input. So to control the ELZ1 with a computer, you need to connect them with a USB cable. Then go in the menu, then MIDI, USB MIDI, and set it to MIDI device. If you want to control the ELZ1 directly with a MIDI keyboard or another MIDI interface, set it to MIDI host. In this MIDI menu, you can also choose the MIDI channel you want to use and activate the MIDI through. The ELZ1 doesn't use velocity as is, but when you control it via MIDI, it will respond to velocity and pitch bend, which is very nice. And if you want to simply synchronize the tempo of the ELZ1 with another synth without controlling the note it plays, you can go to the sequencer setting, then clock and set it to MIDI clock. The sync and sync through in this menu is to synchronize the ELZ1 with another machine by using a mini jack cable. The sync is to receive the audio clock from another machine, and the sync through is to send the audio clock to another machine. So that's a big toolset to create your sound, and you have also a lot to play with it with the Arpeggiator, the sequencer, or the possibility to use it with another machine. And now that we have seen all that, it is time to wrap it up with the pros and the cons, where I say what I liked about it and what I didn't like about it. But just before we begin, let me know in the comment what you think about the ELZ1. First off, I like the concept design of it, having the main section clearly with these 5 buttons here, with this knob to control everything. At first I thought it would feel more like heavy menu diving all the time, but it is actually very fast to jump from one section to another to go change what you want to change. You can edit the filter, then in one button change the gate of the note in the Arpeggiator, and one button press away is the pulse width or the envelope. The screen feels big and easy to read, so you're never lost, even if you have only 5 knobs to control everything. The only downside of this is that you can't change parameters of different sections at the same time, but again, less buttons make a clearer interface. I also like the versatility of it. Some oscillators work in very similar ways, but all in all it gives you a huge amount of options to create different sounds, so it feels like it can do any type of sound. It sounds very digital, though if you embrace that and even want to make some great low-bit synth, you will have everything you need to make it sound amazing. It is also very transportable. The pouch that comes with it feels thick enough, and I love the fact that I can power it with my small phone battery tank. I didn't know what to expect from this keyboard as it's just buttons, but it's actually very responsive, and having 3 octaves makes it comfortable to play. Also using this kind of keyboard makes it a lot smaller, so yeah, easy to transport. Sonicware have already shown that it is possible to update the firmware of the ELZ1. So the list of cards I have is more a list of updates I would like to see in the future versions, if it's possible to add them. I would love to see more than 3 slots for the audio files. I know the space of the ELZ1 is limited, but if you could split that available space into as many slots as possible, that could be great, just to have more audio samples to play with. I would have loved to be able to synchronize the rate of the LFO to the BPM, as well as a frequency follow on the filters. I would have loved to be able to have a filter that opens up as I go in the higher notes, just so I would be able to build tones that would be more consistent throughout all the octaves. And again, it doesn't really use velocity. You can use velocity if you control it with another MIDI device, but I would have loved to be able to control the velocity in the sequencer, for example. So that's it for me. If you want to learn more about the ELZ1, I will leave Sonicware's website in the description. Don't hesitate to tell me what you think about it in the comments. I'm very curious to see what you think of it. If you like this video, don't hesitate to like it or to share it to a friend. In the meantime, take care, and I'll see you next time.